I was hired to help repair damaged cemeteries in my county. Now, I'm not an engineer or anything. I'm just a regular guy with a somewhat regular job. The county inmates maintain the graveyards around here. They do all the mowing, the trimming, and miscellany like that. But when the ground over the graves start caving in and the headstones start shunting to the side, they call me. I'm self-employed and own my own earth-moving equipment. You know, dump truck, lowboy, backhoe, front-end loader, bobcat, and a Kubota farm tractor. I've dug graves for residents since I was 17, and I even helped relocate an entire graveyard to make way for part of the interstate around here. To say the least, well, I'm not squeamish around the graves or dead people. I've seen some strange things, and I've seen some rather disturbing things in my 30 years in the business, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw and experienced 3 years ago. Now, I grew up in the mountains, so I was accustomed to hearing all the folk tales and ghost stories. Sure, there are many things that go bump in the night, but for me, there's always a logical explanation. Or at least there was until 3 years ago. That was the year of the missing kids. The whole community was stressed and scared. Kids normally allowed to run free were restricted to their front yards or by their parents' sides, and they were not allowed out after dark, not even to take out the trash. The men started carrying handguns whether or not they had permits, and more women than ever took the firearms safety course and brought their own handguns. It started in the spring of 2016 with the disappearance of a 7-year-old girl who was walking the 300 yards between her parents' house and her grandmother's house. Now, there was nothing but a big field and a small graveyard between the two houses. Mountains rose up all around the perimeter of the land, but it was a wide, clear shot between the houses. The mother and grandmother could stand on their porches and wave to each other. And that girl had made that trip hundreds of times alone, just as others in the family had done countless times. But this time, she didn't make it to her grandmother's house. She vanished without a trace. Now the county banded together, and it seemed that everyone joined the teams looking for little Brianna round the clock for 2 weeks. Bloodhounds lost her scent at the top of the cemetery. Thinking that she'd wandered into the woods, the search team scoured every foot of the mountains on that side, all the way to the top where an old property line fence had been put into place, probably 100 years ago. There was no way the little girl could have climbed over it, gone under it, or even around it. And spring turned to summer. 2 boys, 6 and 9, went missing in the same week. One was playing at the edge of his backyard, and the other was playing ball with friends at dusk in a field that butted up against another graveyard. All told, there were 9 kids who went missing from our town in as many months. I know that by the standards of big cities, that's not a mind-boggling number, but for a community of only 3,600 people, it's an everybody knows everybody kind of place. Outside help was brought in to help with the searches. After every square foot of the community had been searched, there was nothing else to do but to wait and hope. Of course, the affected families still searched. Some of them became completely dysfunctional, lost their jobs, and were going crazy with the grief and stress of just not knowing what had happened to their kids. My wife's cousin was one of the families with a missing kid, and we were hip deep in all the searching, putting up flyers and petitioning for more help, and it did no good. Not a bit of good. And so, when the job offer came in, I was kind of glad to have something to take me away from all that for a few hours every day. I felt bad for the families, though, and actually quite guilty to have a small escape from the sadness each day. Hell, work is all I've ever known, though, and that's how I cope with all the stresses of my life. I work. The first graveyard wasn't in all that bad of shape. There were 2 toppled stones and 1 sunken grave. Nothing that could take more than a few hours at most. I walked the cemetery, checking the oldest graves first and worked my way around to the newer ones, and saw no other problems. I fixed the problems and was finished well before lunch. The second cemetery, however, was in much worse shape, and it was the one where the first little girl had gone missing. I didn't really want to work there, but, well, I figured I would get it finished and move on as quickly as possible. As I worked through the older section, I noticed that all the graves were in pretty good shape. It was the newer ones that were sinking. Some had fallen in so badly that the edges of the vaults were visible. One of the headstones, a big double stone, had fallen completely into the hole. That would be a real bitch to get out. I was going to need a dump truck load of dirt at the very least to fill in all the holes, a chain and a hoist to lift the gravestones that had fallen into them, and probably a second set of hands. I didn't really recall the graveyard being in such bad shape when we were all out that way helping look for little Brianna just a few months before. There had been very little rain, so that didn't cause the damage either. Quite honestly, I was stumped for an explanation. I left to get all the things I would need, except that second set of hands. Bill was on another job, and he's my go-to guy with stuff like that. I worked with the dirt and a shovel for hours. Before I knew it, supper time had arrived. I left a wheelbarrow and went home to grab a sandwich, meaning to finish when I returned. I could work after dark if I needed to. I have a set of spotlights rigged on the other side of the dump bed of the truck. I just wanted to be rid of the dirt I had already dumped at the end of the cemetery. I returned to the cemetery and something had changed. It just felt different. The woods loomed darker behind me. The houses on either side seemed farther away, and everything was too still, too quiet. The sun wasn't set, but it was close enough that it caused long, creeping shadows among the tombstones. My skin prickled and I tried to whistle to break the eerie silence. With the floodlights on, I could only see the area where I worked without shielding my eyes. The feeling that someone, or something, was lurking close by unnerved me. But every time I stopped to check, I saw nothing, I heard nothing. And then, as I was filling in a plot that didn't need much dirt, I heard something behind me that sounded like dirt filtering onto an empty cardboard box. I spun around, shovel poised to swing at whatever it was. I saw nothing at first. And then the sound came again. I stepped toward it, shovel still raised. It was another cave-in, happening right in front of me. I lowered the shovel and watched as the ground sank over a grave that was only a year old. The grass shuddered at first, and then it went several feet down into the dark hole. I leaned to look in, and it was as if the hole belched out chunks of concrete and bit of debris that smelled like death. Backing away, I coughed. The smell gagged me. I turned, holding in bile until I could get away from the grave, and I hurled between 2 small headstones at the edge of the cemetery. After I calmed my insides a little, I walked back to that grave and looked down into the hole with my shirt pulled over my nose. The stench lingered, hung in the air like a thick, moveless fog. The hole was so deep that I couldn't see the bottom. I got a flashlight from my truck and returned, shining the bright beam down and around. There was no vault visible, and I couldn't make out what I was seeing. If I was seeing the bottom, it seemed impossibly far down into the earth. Or maybe it was a trick of the light. I got on my knees and leaned farther into the hole, searching for the vault that should have been there. I saw no vault or coffin. It was as if they had both simply disappeared. The spotlights winked out, leaving me in the dark except for the flashlight. I looked over my shoulder at the truck, and the ground gave way under me. It collapsed before I could register what was happening. I found the vault and the coffin. The vault lid had been demolished, and the coffin lid was obliterated by the force beyond my reckoning. Debris lay everywhere as I scrambled out of the mess and into a cave. At that point, I wasn't freaked out as you might think. I mean, yeah, the situation was bad, but I thought it explained why the graves were in such bad shape up top. I didn't know there was a cave system there. My bet was that other people didn't know it either. Now, shining my light around, I was cutting arcs through the pitch black. I searched for a way out. I certainly wasn't getting out the way I'd gotten in. 2 tunnels led away in different directions, and I chose the one I could stand up in. After several paces into the tunnel, I realized that there had been no body in the broken coffin. Not that I had stuck around and looked for one. Deciding it wasn't the time nor the place to think about it, I hastened my steps. Cold air whirled past me, sending a chill over my skin and ruffling my hair. There was stealthy movement in the air, hidden movement. I turned to see nothing, but a feeling of foreboding settled into my bones. I knew something bad, something evil was in that place with me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate, and I stumbled into the wall several times. The sound of my own panic only made things worse. The chamber I was stumbling into was... how do I even describe it? It was like an antechamber to hell. There were rotting and chewed corpses lying helter-skelter in piles, bones with bits of flesh strewn over the floor, gobs of hair that looked like gory wigs, and to the right side was a pile of jewelry. The gold, silver, and precious stones were piled high as my knee. I'd forgotten to breathe as my eyes played over the horrors, and when I did take a breath, I retched between my feet. Scuttling from the tunnel spun around me so fast I almost fell into a heap of bodies. Something moved steadily toward me down that tunnel, and I had no choice but to cross the room of bodies to the other tunnel and hope it was a way out. My brain kept telling me it was just Halloween decorations, not dead and mutilated bodies I was stepping over. I made it to the other tunnel, actually, a few steps into it, and I could smell fresh, cool air on my face. My thoughts latched on to the freedom that lay somewhere ahead, and I did run that time, but not fast enough. The thing following me had caught up. It let out a bone-jarring scream, stopping my heart for a moment, and I felt its claws rake down my back like red-hot iron. I lost my footing on a slight rise at the small exit hole, and the beast clamped a cold, long-fingered hand around my ankle. It dragged me swiftly through the tunnel and back to the room of corpses, and I clawed at the dirt and wall as it dragged me mercilessly into its chamber and flung me like a rag doll onto a pile of bodies. The flashlight flew from my hand and spun, the beam of light stopping on the monster. It was pale, chalky, and gray, except for the black pits of its eyes and the yellow of its teeth. It was about 6 feet tall and bony. The ropey muscles flexed under its skin as it let loose with another one of those screams. I was completely frozen, paralyzed with fear. But slowly, I rolled to my side and snaked my hand out for the light and shined it in the creature's eyes. It squealed in pain and threw up its arm to shield its face. I was halfway down the tunnel again before I realized I had even moved. I didn't lose my footing and clawed my way out of that hole, only to find that I was inside the woods. Pitching toward the direction I thought would lead me out, I stumbled and rebounded off trees until I fell out of the woods and onto a little clearing just above the graveyard. And I could see my truck. Now, I can't even begin to tell you how much relief I felt at the sight of that old thing. But there was another light in the cemetery, and I couldn't make sense of it at first, and then I screamed to alert whoever it was that I needed help. The light swung toward me, and my wife called out my name. She stood only a few feet from the hole I'd fallen into. I was trying to tell her to get into the truck or her car, anything to get her away from that hole. My voice cracked and my brain reeled. She lowered her light and I continued to stumble over the uneven ground, motioning toward the vehicles. Then her eyes widened, her mouth dropped, and suddenly she was gone with only a squawk of shock. Reaching the hole, I caught only a glimpse of her horror-stricken face as she disappeared into the darkness. I screamed her name and pounded the dirt. There was no response except the sounds of crunching bones and ripping flesh. I cursed the monster and threw every threat imaginable at it as I stalked back to my truck, pulling the shotgun and a rope from behind the seat. I walked back to the hole. I tied the rope around a heavy tombstone, dialed 911 on my cell phone, and tossed it farther up the cemetery, and I readied to climb back down into that hole. My wife's tremulous voice called to me barely above a whisper. She moved near my beam of light, but shied from it when I moved it closer. "Henry, help me. Get me out of here before it comes back, please." It was her voice, but there was something very wrong with her movements. "I'm coming, Margaret. How bad are you hurt?" I started repelling as quickly as I could. She whimpered and hid on the other side of the broken vault until I was standing in front of her. One part of me wishes I'd never gone back in that hole, but the other part of me is damn glad. Margaret shambled around that vault, and I could immediately see she looked like a stretched suit being worn by someone far too large. And the black soulless pits where her beautiful bright green eyes had been told me all I needed to know. The thing I was looking at was no longer Margaret. Somehow, that thing had killed her and was wearing her. With tears doubling and troubling my vision, I raised the shotgun and pulled the trigger. Margaret's body crumbled like a discarded latex mask. And above me, the night was alive with warbling red and blue lights. If there were sirens, I couldn't hear them above my own screams.